Okay, we have quite a few now, so the rest can join us eventually. Good afternoon, everybody from the Irish Academy of Public Relations in Dublin. The first thing I need to do is tell you that we are recording this for people who won't be able to attend today. So welcome to the second in our masterclass series on crisis communication. And I see a few returnees from our first podcasting webinar. You're very welcome back. Our CEO, Ellen Gunning, will be delivering the presentation today. Ellen is a trainer, an author, and a PR practitioner. She's very much a go-to person for people who are dealing with crisis, and she's a seasoned veteran of the PR industry. I just want to give a bit of housekeeping before I hand you over to Ellen. As I said, we are recording, so if you wouldn't mind keeping your microphones mute to eliminate background noise. The format is Ellen's going to deliver the presentation and we're going to take a Q&A session afterwards. So if you would type your questions into the chat feature, and then after the presentation, Ellen will answer the questions one by one. Okay, enjoy the webinar and thank you very much. Ellen, over to you.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Colette. I'm looking forward to this, I have to tell you. I've loads of familiar faces and familiar names. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, I think, is probably appropriate. Colette told me beforehand that she'd had a look at the list, and we actually have people joining us from, I love saying this, right? From Ireland, Greece, Australia, Spain, Nigeria, United States, Philippines, and Lesotho. That's a wonderful mix, isn't it? So welcome to each and every one of you. What I want to do today is I want to talk to you about crisis PR. I'm 30 years in public relations now. For the last 10 years, I have exclusively worked on crisis PR. Before that, I did all kinds of things, including crisis, but I actually love the crisis element of things, which says something about my personality. But I love that it's happening very fast. It's happening now. You need a quick response and you need to get it right, or you'll drown. You'll find yourself in terrible trouble. What I want to do today, the webinar is about sort of the 7 deadly sins. But what I want to do today is give you real life examples. Now, obviously, the difficulty with handling crisis is that you can't put all of your clients on the website. So you can't say, well, only for me, he would never have heard of him anymore. His reputation would be muck. Or only for me, that company wouldn't exist, or that charity would have gone out of business. So you can't actually promote your clients to promote you. And equally, you can't sit there and say, wait till I tell you what happened to X company and how I saved them. But what I do want to do today is I thought the most useful thing to do with this webinar was to give you real life examples. I won't identify the clients, but I will give you the real stories. I'll tell you what happened, and I'll tell you how I advise them to handle it. So hopefully you'll pick up some kind of hints and tips from it as we go along. And just to humor me, can we have cameras on for a few minutes? I just love looking at all the faces first. Is that really cheeky? I know, I'm such a nuisance. Now they'll probably tell me, oh, hi Claire. They'll probably tell me I'm busty, I'm breaking all the rules now. Look, isn't this just wonderful? Isn't this so nice to actually see everybody? Hi Dawn, haven't seen you in ages. Who else? Oh, look, loads of people coming in here. Oh, this is really nice. Have we any men in the group? We have a Robert Masters who's hiding, but he seems to be the only man I can see. But no, we haven't. We have a Stephen as well. Okay, hi Stephen. I was beginning to think, oh, hi Leanne, Katrina. Who else have we got? Neve. Oh, this is a great group altogether. I see a cat's tail there somewhere. Maria, hi you. Who else did not say hello to? Hi Renee, how are you? Leanne. I'm going to get that name so completely wrong. Jay Jeswa? Close-ish? Not bad. I'm super impressed with myself.
Absolutely perfect. Absolutely perfect.
I'm just going to retire now before I screw everything else up for the rest. Thank you all for that. I really appreciate it. Let me get you kick-started. 7 deadly sins of crisis management. I'm going to ask Molly to look after the PowerPoints. As any of you who know me know, I'm absolutely technologically useless. So this allows me to dodge all the bullets. So if anything goes wrong, it's not me. Molly can fix it while I continue to talk. I wanted to begin by looking at what I call AHA. I created AHA for the first edition of my book, Public Relations: A Practical Approach, which was probably back in 2007. And AHA was what I used to actually indicate what you need to do if you're planning for a crisis. So a crisis involves anticipation, homework, activity, and aftermath. Really simple, but the amount of work involved is quite substantial. The anticipation is really about putting together a crisis plan. Everybody has a crisis that's going to happen. If you're a food company, there's a very good chance that there will be food tampering, or that somebody will be served a meal that isn't properly cooked. And that's going to be your crisis. You can reasonably anticipate it. If you're a pharmaceutical company, you may have somebody taking tablets that were out of date, or taking too many tablets and they didn't realize there was something wrong, and they didn't realize they couldn't take that volume, and you have a crisis. If you have an airline, you've always got the possibility of a plane crash. You've got a pilot dying or having a heart attack while they're flying the plane. You've got threats from people taking over the plane. You've got all kinds of things. And irrespective of which industry you're in, you can definitely anticipate an attack on social media at some stage. Somebody will decide that the trolls will come after you and say, I don't like what they do because. So you definitely have a crisis waiting to happen. Every single organization has. What you would generally try to do is at least prepare for the ones that you can reasonably anticipate. There may be others that will hit you sideways and you couldn't have anticipated them. The likes of 9/11 in New York, I really don't think, if you had planned for every kind of crisis you could imagine, nobody would have imagined that. So that was a crisis that couldn't be planned for. But the crisis plan that kicked in was one that was for any crisis that involves evacuating a huge number of people, taking over the city and organizing a different way of entry and exit, getting fire brigade in. So the bones of the crisis plan was there. So that's your anticipation, a crisis plan that you have ready to kick in. Your homework is effectively 3 pieces. One is a media pack. And the media pack it's partly the press release that's done that is waiting for the pieces to be filled in the middle. But crucially, your media pack is all of the information about your company or your charity or your organization that you can send out immediately. So as soon as a crisis happens and the first media contact you, you can say, here's what you need to know about us. So this is how long the company is in existence. This is what we produce. This is our turnover for the last year. These are the members of our board. This is our advisory committee. So this effectively what you're giving them is enough information to allow them to speak knowledgeably about your business. You haven't spoken about the crisis at all, but you're working from the basis that most of the people covering the crisis won't know who you are or won't know enough about you. We all know the major names, like Apple, for example. But if you ask me to handle crisis for Apple tomorrow, I would be left saying, well, who's on the board of Apple? How much do they turn over? What volume of product do they sell in Greece where there happens to be a crisis? So you literally would prepare that pack so that you can start to fill space immediately and give yourself tiny amounts of time, but every little piece of time makes a huge difference in a crisis. Your homework includes training. Your spokespersons, and there should be 2, should be very well trained, and they should be retrained every year. So it's a bit like learning how to ride a bicycle or drive a car. If you never have to do it, that's fine. You know how to do it. But once a year, somebody says, let's just get back in there again and do it one more time to make sure that you're as fresh, because things change over the year. I'll come back to it later on, but the training is really important, because what you say, how you say it, where you stand saying it, and how you look when you're saying it are vital in a crisis, because you've got tiny pieces of information, and we all make decisions very fast, like in picoseconds. And the third element of your homework is you should have 2 people on your team. You're going to create a crisis team, but there are 2 people, in my opinion, who are vital to your crisis team. One is a PR expert, internal or external. You need somebody who is a communications expert who can tell you how this will be received outside, because you're drowning in all of the information that you're being given. You need somebody who's slightly one step removed, who says, this is what you can say and this is how you should say it. You also need legal. You need somebody who says, but if you say it that way, these are the implications. Now, an awful lot of your homework will have been done in advance and you'll have prepped what you can and cannot say. That's really important. But you need access to those two. And if there was a third person on your team that I would nominate as being absolutely vital, it's what I'd call a deep throat. I don't know if how many of you are old enough to remember All the President's Men, the movie, but there was the person who was the source of all the information was called Deep Throat. And Deep Throat, from your point of view, is somebody on the team that you can literally make a quick call to and say, I'm being asked about the amount of X that's contained in this product. What are they looking for? Why would anybody ask this question? I'm being asked about whether or not, twice now I've received a question about whether or not there has ever been any financial impropriety in the past. What am I missing? Was there something in the last 20, 30 years? Because you're much better off getting it out there and saying, this is the second time it's happened. The first time was in 1913 or whatever. So that's part of your homework. Your activity is literally surviving the crisis. It's coping with it as best you can. And your aftermath is vital. Your aftermath is basically coming back in again and saying, how well did we do? How quickly did we react? How good were our spokespersons? Did we control the message? Or did the message control us? Did somebody else have control of this crisis? Or were we in control of it from minute one? What was the tone of the coverage? And what would we change for the next time? You have to, from every crisis that you're in, you have to learn for the next time. Let me have a look at what media are looking for, because crisis inevitably involves media. And it involves media covering the crisis. It's what amplifies the crisis. It's what allows your publics to find out what's actually going on. And I think you need to start from a position of understanding what media actually needs. So media's role in a crisis, and don't get me wrong, I love working with media, right? I think I understand these guys. I know where they're coming from. And there's a huge pressure in dealing with them, but they're under a huge amount of pressure as well. Media's job is to find out what's going on and communicate it to a much wider public. They have a very short space of time in which to do it. So they're feeling the same kind of pressure that you're feeling. There are a number of things that you need to be aware of with media. One is, if you're training spokespersons in advance, train them in how to deal with media. Watch how they behave. I'm really conscious that we did training a couple of years back with a group board of directors. And one of the men on the board of directors was a lovely man, absolutely lovely man. But he kept touching your arm when he was talking to you, or he'd touch your back and say, wait till I tell you. And each time he did it, I said to him, stop with the touchy-feely. Sit down, put your hands on your lap and talk to somebody. And he said, but I don't mean anything by it. And I said, I know you don't mean anything by it, and there's nothing offensive about it, but you're going to annoy the hell out of people. Don't touch people when you talk to them. We were doing training. We brought in a journalist for the afternoon. She knew nothing about the team at all, except the brief that I had given her, which is, this is what you're asking them about. And when he came into the room, she was sitting, it was radio training, so we had a glass wall. We could all see what was happening. He went in to be interviewed by her, and she was writing notes. And he said hi, and she didn't even look up. She said, hi, can you sit over there and I'll be with you in a second? And she carried on writing. And he walked up behind her and put his hand on her back and said, delighted to be here or something. And she instantly said, take your hands off me. And she raised her head instantly and said, take your hands off me. What's with this, hands on my back? Sit down over there like I asked you to. And when we were watching it from the outside, I said to him, now watch, he's actually annoyed her. So now she's just going to give him a roasting of an interview because she can. And she did. She took the skin off his back with an interview. In fairness to him, he came out afterwards and said, I don't think I'm ever going to do a radio interview again. I don't really think I got it. And in fairness, he wasn't good material for a radio interview. And that's really important. There was nothing wrong with the man himself. There was nothing wrong with his belief in the company. There was nothing wrong with his ability to defend, but he couldn't actually work with journalists. He couldn't work with media. You knew he was going to drive them crazy. So that's one element. The second element is to be very conscious that media are extremely cynical. That's their business. Mm-hmm. You're supposed to raise an eyebrow every time you say something and say, really? I don't know, would I believe it? I had a client quite a number of years ago on The Late Late Show. The Late Late Show is the most popular television program in Ireland. It's watched by everybody on a Friday evening. Anybody who comes into the country wants to be on The Late Late Show because it's the Letterman or whatever of Ireland. I had a client on The Late Late. We had her media trained in the afternoon. She was under, it was crisis. She was under savage pressure. And what people actually forget is that in a crisis, like even with me, I'm handling crisis, but I'm not in the crisis. I can still switch off and go sleep. If you're in the middle of a crisis, that's your worm 24/7. You're trying to figure out how do you cope with it. And she was under savage pressure and had already agreed to do the late. We did media training with her in the afternoon and she absolutely fell apart. She completely fell apart. I took her out afterwards and said, okay, if there was any way that I could cancel your interview this evening on television, I would, because you're absolutely not fit to do it. But my bigger worry is if I cancel the interview, it will attract more attention because now you're dodging the media and you won't come out and answer simple questions. So I said to her that the deal is I'll pick you up, I'll drive you to the television station, I'll mind you. So I'll make sure nobody gets really to talk to you before you go onto the program. You can go onto the program as soon as they break for the ads. I'll say my goodbyes on behalf of everybody. I'll put you back into the car. I'll take you home. And basically you can put my phone number on your answering machine, drink 3 bottles of wine, put your head under a duvet, do whatever you do. Cope, I'll look after it. And she said, fine. And in the middle of the interview, and it was about 6 or 7 minutes, maybe. In the middle of the interview, Gay Byrne, who was interviewed at the time, asked her some question. And she got really upset and her bottom lip quivered and the eyes started to water. And I thought she's going to lose it. And if she loses it, we're all dead. And the interviewer actually came over to her, put his hand on her arm or something and said, I know it's very difficult. I know you're under a lot of pressure. And he gave her just about enough time to recover. She finished the interview. She's very good. We said our goodbyes. We got into the car and I'm leaving the television studio and the phone rang and I knew it was a journalist. It was on hands-free. I could put it on speaker. And I said to her, do you mind if I take this call? And she said, no problem. I should never have taken it. That was my problem. I took the call, clicked on the phone and said, hiya, John. And he said, God, Gunning, I know you were good, but how did you make her cry? That was a stroke of brilliance. And there's no answer to it. But as far as he was concerned, I'd actually said to her, and if you get a chance, get a little teary because it'll win people over to your side. And that's the kind of cynicism that you expect. So be prepared for it. People won't believe that when something genuinely happens, it's necessarily genuine. You have to earn it. And the third thing about understanding media is because they're under pressure all the time and they need to react very quickly, they don't do all the nice, polite things that you would do if you had loads of time. So I had a client who rang me one day. We were only getting to grips with this crisis. We knew that it was going to break, but it was out of our control when it broke. We kind of figured it was going to break within the next 24 hours. And she rang me and said, look, I have a journalist who has just stormed into my office, spoke to the receptionist and demanded to speak to me. And the receptionist said, no, you need to make an appointment like everybody else or whatever. And she said, I'm looking out the window here. And this guy is sitting outside my door in a car. He's just waiting for me to leave. What do I do now? And this was about 3:30 in the afternoon, something like that. And I said to her, okay, have a good look at the car and tell me, is he on his own or has he got somebody else with him? And she said, he has somebody else with him. I said, okay, so the chances are the person he has with him is a photographer. There's a pretty good chance that they're from a Red Top or from a tabloid. And what they're looking for is that photograph, that photograph of somebody leaving an office saying, go away or step back, give me time. I have nothing to say to you. And I said, so you're going to be papped. So you've got to make sure that you're not papped. So my solution was, I said to her, you normally finish at 5. Is there any reason why you can't finish at 4:30? Close the entire office at 4:30 today? And she said, no, there's no reason. I said, fine. Have you a back door? She said, I have. Is your car parked at the back? She said, yes. Right. So 4 o'clock, you call the staff together and tell them what's happening. And 4 o'clock, you leave by the back door in your car. And at 4:30, and it's really important, every single member of the staff walks out the door, locks up and says, good luck, we're finished. Because there's no photograph there. There's no story in the company closed 30 minutes early. So she said, fine, that's okay, no problem at all. And I'd got a quick text from her to say, that's grand, I'm out and everybody else is leaving at 4:30. And then I got a frantic phone call from her at about 5 or 5:15. And she said, this journalist is absolutely disgraceful. She was seething. She was absolutely seething. I want you to get like a high court injunction to prevent him coming near me and my family. And after she calmed down, I said, okay, now you need to tell me, what did he do with you and your family? And she said, while I was in work, he called to my home where I live and he knocked on the door and my, I think it was 10 or 12-year-old, answered the door. And he said, hello, is your mummy there? What time is your mummy due home? Is your mummy in work? And the child told the mother this had happened. And I said, okay, I need to know, why are you so annoyed about this? What did he do that was wrong? And she said, you're missing the point. He didn't confine what he was doing to work. So it doesn't have to. Anybody can walk up your path and knock on your door. He didn't say anything to the child that was inappropriate. He asked, where's your mummy? And is she in work? Like, the child was obviously empowered by the mother to answer the door. There was absolutely nothing wrong. But I do understand how it really added to her pressure and her feeling of, I'm under pressure. I could also understand from the journalist's point of view, he was thinking, maybe she's at home. I didn't get her at the receptionist didn't let me in. Maybe she's actually at home. Maybe if the child opens the door, she'll say, yes, she's in the kitchen. I'll get her for you. It's just the way journalists operate. So be conscious of what they actually need, because they're under pressure to get the story very fast as well. If you understand what journalists need, you also need to understand how important it is to get advice from the right people. The wrong advice in a crisis will absolutely bury you. So you need to be certain that the people who are advising you know what they're talking about, and you cannot find it out for the first time in a crisis. So you need to find out in advance who you're relying on and what they've done in the past. If you're signing a contract, you wouldn't dream of signing a contract without getting legal advice. Just run your eyes over this and tell me, it looks fine to me, but what do I know? I'm not a legal person. So is this contract okay? And inevitably the lawyers will come back and say something like, just this little bit here, this doesn't make sense. That shouldn't apply to you. And that might cost you an awful lot of money in the future. So renegotiate that piece. They're trained to spot things in exactly the same way that somebody who handles crisis PR has a nose for it. They're trained to spot it. I handled a crisis a while back, and it made me really conscious about the right people. I was called into, crisis never happens on a Monday to Friday from 9 to 5, by the way, absolutely never. So this is a Friday evening, it was around 7:30, and I got a phone call to say, we're all in a pub, this is Ireland. So we're all in a pub around the corner from you. We're drinking gallons of coffee from your home. We know that you're away, because they contacted the office. Is there any chance you call in? I want you to meet this client and see, could you handle this crisis? And I said, fine. I called in, there were about 4 people in the group, and the man started by saying, we need to get a statement out to media. This is what's happened. Can we get a statement out? And I said to him, before we do anything, I need to figure out, am I actually going to handle this crisis for you? So you need to go right back to minute 1 and tell me what happened, how it happened, who was involved, what the consequences are. I know nothing about your organization. Start by telling me everything. And it took about, I'd say the guts of 3 hours. And at the end of 3 hours, I said, that's fine. I have no problem handling this for you. I'll look after it for you now. And he said, Grand, will you get a statement out? And I said, give me the names of the journalists who's actually chasing you. And he said, it's not who's chasing me. I need to get a statement out. And I said, but you're getting a statement out to who has asked you for a statement? Print media, television, radio, who's looking for it? And it turned out that he had a PR colleague who had advised him that what he needed to do was get a statement out as fast as possible. So basically put his position and say, this is what's happening. And I said to him, there are 2 reasons why you shouldn't do that. One, there's a High Court injunction against this story actually breaking, and the story won't break until the High Court lifts the injunction, and they will lift the injunction. But when it breaks, we then know how the story breaks, because basically a newspaper had the story, but the person they were writing about had got an injunction against them. So it was all tied up legally. So in the first instance, you're probably going to be in terrible legal trouble if you do. But in the second instance, even if you weren't, you never issue a statement blind. Never, ever. You wait to find out what is it they're asking you about. Don't go writing a 3-page, this is everything I know about what's happened, because you've given them 54 different alleyways to run down that they didn't even know existed. So from our point of view, so I'm perfectly happy that you tell everybody that I'm handling the crisis for you and they can contact me. And interestingly enough, I had one journalist who contacted me. The injunction was lifted on a Friday. It was a major story in a Sunday newspaper. And on the Saturday, I had a journalist contact me to say, could I have the statement, please, on behalf of your client? And I said, there isn't a statement. What's the question? And I get you a response to it. And he said, no, I know there's a statement. And I said, no, there isn't. And this particular journalist would be close to the PR person who had previously advised my new client. And I said, no, there isn't actually a statement. And he said, I know there is. I said, well, send it to me because I didn't write it. And I'll tell you whether or not this is a statement on behalf of the client. and he never published anything. What he was looking for was, he was on a trawling mission. What can you tell me? How can I pick holes? And nobody knew until the Sunday what story was actually going to break. So make sure that the people who are actually advising you are giving you the right advice, basically. Watch in the public interest. Journalists, when they're looking for any information from you at all, are very inclined to say, but I'm entitled to know this because it's in the public interest. And in my opinion, they regularly confuse in the public interest and of interest to the public. They're two completely different things. Of interest to the public is any kind of stuff. I read all sorts of stuff. It's all of interest to me. But it's not in the public interest that the information will be public. The best example I could think of is a really old one, but I think it shows the difference pretty clearly. 25 years ago in Ireland, I was traveling from Cork, which is in the very south of the country, to Donegal, which is in the very north. So I was probably 3.5, 4, probably more, 4 or 5 hours in the car driving. I was driving at the time when a woman called Imelda Riney and her 3-year-old child and a local priest had all gone missing in suspicious circumstances. And the radio was full of what's happening. Has anybody found anything? The police had closed in on a wooded area in County Clare. They thought there was something happening there. So I was literally listening to the breaking news story as I went from one piece to another. So we eventually found out that a woman had been found, a 3-year-old child had been found, the woman had been shot. I think she was shot in the head. The child had been shot in the head. The priest was found and he had been shot. So we knew this was Imelda Riney and her son and the local priest. And then about 8 or 9 o'clock that night, a journalist came on the radio and said, breaking news, we've actually been told by sources close to the police that the bullets that were fired into their heads had been filed. So they've been filed down before they were actually put into the shotgun, which meant that when the bullet landed in their heads, it exploded or imploded. And no forensics will be possible. Like, this is a serious psycho or whatever that we're after. And at the time, nobody knew who had committed the crime. We just knew the search was still on for whoever this culprit was. And I remember thinking that is not in the public interest. That is of interest to the public. It's the kind of salacious detail that you think, oh my God, imagine anybody actually thought in advance to file the bullets. It's not in the public interest because I, as somebody who is not safe because this person is still out there, do not want their counsel to know that the police think they can't get any forensic evidence against them because the bullets were filed down. It's not in the public interest. It's of interest to the public. So watch when you're being asked questions, because in fairness, you have a duty to give people information which is in the public interest. But you don't have a duty to answer questions for things that people would just be interested in. Which probably leads me to the next crucial point about telling the truth. In a crisis, you are always telling the truth. In any PR, you should always tell the truth. My late mother, Rhoda Mercy on her, used to say, you need to have a great memory to be a liar. So you're always telling the truth. But if you're telling the truth, you're not telling all of the truth all of the time. Because nobody's entitled to all of the truth all of the time. You cannot mislead. You cannot tell a lie. But you decide how much of the truth you actually issue. Let me give you a really, what did Molly call this earlier? My, Crime Inc. example. So let me give you a gory example, right? But it's an individual example and it kind of explains it in terms of a company, I hope. So let's assume that you're at home, you have the nosy neighbor lives next door. You know, the kind of neighbor that you say hello to and you come in the door and go, God, she was out there again watching who's coming in and who's going out. She's nothing else to do. Nosy neighbor is next door. Your brother has taken too much cocaine. He's gone absolutely nuts. He picked up a bread knife and he stabbed your sister. Let's make this nice and gory, right? So you call an ambulance and your sister is being carted out into the ambulance with the bread knife sticking out of her chest. And the nosy neighbor sticks up her head across the wall and says, what happened? Now think about it for a minute. The nosy neighbor has absolutely no business being told everything that happened. You don't owe her a full and frank explanation. You cannot say, my sister fell down the stairs, because the chances of her falling down the stairs and landing on a bread knife are like slim, and you're lying. But what you will do, you tell her the truth, but you tell it in as much as you want to. So you'll end up saying something like, I actually don't know the full detail of what happened, but it's very serious. I mean, it's a knife injury. That's why I called the ambulance. I don't know what's happening. They're taking her away to St. Luke's Hospital, and all we can do now is travel with her and hope for the best. Thank you for your concern. And you'll step into the ambulance. You haven't told a word of a lie. You've said that it was a knife injury. You've said that it was very serious. You've said that it was her sister. You've said that she's been taken away by ambulance, but you haven't said it was my brother and he was on drugs, and probably the neighbor has no business knowing that, if you get me. So tell the truth, but not all of the truth all of the time. Watch the words that you use, the words that you use in a crisis. You're giving interviews, you're speaking, you're answering questions at breakneck speed. Everybody else has time to sit there and look back on it and go, really? That's what they said? Let me give you a couple of examples. A client a few years ago, what the biggest nightmare, one of the biggest nightmares for a PR person, in my humble opinion, if you're handling crisis, is that the client doesn't tell you they're doing an interview. So you find out because you have the radio on, you go, bugger, he's doing an interview. He should have told me, because at least I could prep him. I could tell him what questions might come up. I could help in some way, and I could be prepared to listen live. Anyway, client gave an interview, and I rang him afterwards and said, it was on Morning Ireland. Morning Ireland is the most listened to radio show in Ireland. It's on RTE1, it's the national broadcaster, has a massive listenership. So if you're going to get a message out to the country, you would do it via Morning Ireland. And it's one of those very fast, very serious current affairs programs. So if you come out of it doing well, you've done well. You've had a good grilling and you know your stuff. And he did very, very well. He was really very good. But I rang him, and I completely understand that at this point, he's now wandering around and everybody is high-fiving him saying, you're the man, that was absolutely marvelous, you did really well, you nailed it. I completely get that. So I rang him and said, you did really well, really pleased with it, except you used a word in the middle of it, renegade. You referred to, they had a problem with a supplier company that was in the Basque area of Spain at the time. And he had said that the people in that company were renegades. And I said to him, it's a terrible word to use. We need to find a different word. And he said, look, this is typical of you people in public relations, and you're all in Dublin and everything. It was a marvelous interview. It was 7 minutes of brilliance on National Airway. And I said, yes, it was, but that one word was wrong. He rang me back, in fairness to him, because the interview was probably about 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning. He rang me back at about 10 and said, I owe you an apology. You're absolutely right. That word, the group in Spain were a unionized workforce. His company was a unionized workforce, and the unions had come in to say, you cannot call fellow unionized workers renegades. So I said, that's fine. Okay. He said, so I rang you to apologize. You were right. I was wrong. That's grand. No big deal. And then he rang at 4 o'clock and he said, now we have a major problem. And I said, with the word? And he said, yeah. I said, okay, I didn't see this gaining legs. How did this grow legs? How are we suddenly still talking about this word renegade? And he said, we're talking about it because what the company had done was they had sent 2 people into the Basque region, which was volatile at the time, to negotiate with the company. And the Spanish embassy had just phoned him to say, actually, the interview was picked up on Spanish radio. They translated the word renegade as banditos, and the embassy wasn't at all confident that they could protect the 2 people who were in the Basque region. So their advice was get them the heck out of there as fast as you possibly can. It definitely set the resolution of the crisis back by 6 weeks, I would think, and it cost the company millions. And it was one word in an interview, just one. So the use of words is really important. The second use of words is watch words that stigmatize. We handled a crisis last year, and the best way to describe the allegation that was being made was that it was an allegation of sexually inappropriate behavior. And I immediately said to the client, as soon as you say that, you've thrown muck at somebody. Because for the rest of his life, people will say, is that the guy? Wasn't there some question mark over him? And people will always follow with, there's no smoke without fire. There is smoke without fire. What we had agreed, what I had recommended and what they agreed with was that if we found that there was a case of sexually inappropriate behavior, no problem calling it out at all. But let's make sure that's what it is before we actually tarnish this guy with that brush. So we spent a lot of time working out a formula of words that said he had stepped aside or had been asked to step aside, and we were conducting an investigation, and it was very airy-fairy. It didn't really say what it was about. You knew something was going on, but you didn't know what. And it actually transpired afterwards that it was sexually inappropriate behavior, and we called it out once we knew that that's what was happening. And the final point about using language is, I mentioned at the beginning that if you're handling a crisis, people look at every word you say and tear it apart. We had a client that we brought in for media training. The media were looking for a soundbite, and actually this was it was a different kind of a crisis, if you like, because we knew the crisis would break, but we knew that the client could get out in front of it. So I was saying, you actually need to offer yourself for interview now, so that you get your side of the story out there, and then somebody else can figure out they're now on the back foot. They have to defend themselves. I contacted media and they said, yeah, we would take the client. It isn't a big enough story that we would do an interview live on television, but we will do a pre-recorded piece, just a quick question and answer session. I took the client in for 2 hours media training. And after 2 hours, we had a 36-second soundbite. It took 2 hours to get the entire story of the crisis down to 36 seconds. And the rule was, if somebody says hello, you can say hello back. If they say anything other than hello, you kick into that 36 seconds and you never, ever deviate from it. And in 36 seconds, we said 5 things. This is who we are. This is what we do. This is what went wrong. This is how we propose to fix it. We're very sorry. Nothing to see here, folks. Move on. Crisis died out within 24 hours. The 36 seconds were specifically crafted so that they were short enough not to encourage somebody to cut the piece, and that even if they did, they could not misinterpret anything in it. So the 36 seconds ran, and once 36 seconds ran, basically my client said, here's the entire story, and the media said, that's fine, there's nothing there to follow up. So the person who tried to follow up became the crank who's trying to keep it alive. Haven't they already said they're dealing with it? This is what happened. 36 seconds, use of words. Let me also look at the word sorry. I don't know why people find it so difficult to say the word sorry, but they do. If you get something wrong, think about it in your regular day-to-day business. If you get something wrong and you ring somebody up, or you're in the office with them and you say, oh, I'm really sorry, I completely screwed that up. They're much more inclined to say, oh, you're an awful idiot. I don't know how you got that wrong, but they'll forgive you. It's like, you know you're an idiot. You know you got it wrong. You said you were sorry. They're much less inclined to forgive you if you're there saying, well, I don't really know how that happened. And maybe we should just investigate it a bit more, but I don't think it had anything to do with me. If your company has got something wrong, you really should come out and say you're sorry. We had a charity that I handled, and they had grown very, very fast. They were taking in huge amounts of money, and they basically didn't have the financial structures in place that would allow them to account for where all of the money was being spent. It was too big. It got too big too fast. And nobody had the sense to say, we need to bring in somebody with a financial background to show us how to manage this charity. When we came in, my background is in finance. So when I came in, I got a financial person to come in and said, have a quick look over it. Tell me what you think. Because from my point of view, I wanted to be sure there was no funny stuff going on. There was no money being hidden somewhere or being taken out of in a corner, because that affects my reputation if I'm defending them. And he came back and said, no, there's no funny stuff going on. They really are like legitimate, they're above board, but they're completely out of their depth. They don't know what the hell they're doing, and they can't manage this volume of money. So I came back to the charity and said, really what you need to do is come out with your hands up and say, there isn't a penny of the money that we have received that has been misappropriated. There's not one farthing that hasn't gone to the cause that you have given it to. But we absolutely accept that the financial structures that we had in place were not adequate for the amount of money that we were putting through. And we apologize, and we will change the structures. and introduce new structures and bring in an advisory board to actually monitor what we're doing. And I said to the charity at the time, the only downside is you will be hit very hard on the basis that you didn't know what the heck you were doing. It's incompetence, but it's not financial skullduggery. But you've got to take the hit for the incompetence. And they said, fine. What we hadn't anticipated was that they had one major donor. And the major donor turned around and said, I want all my money back, please. I'm just not happy with the way you people run things. And it closed the charity. They had no money. It was a hell of a consequence from it. But that was saying sorry. The other thing about saying sorry is that you actually need to be very careful about saying sorry. If you have, legal people will tell you that once you say you're sorry, so let's assume somebody dies on a building site. You're a building company and somebody dies on the building site. They fall off scaffolding and they die. The legal people will say to you, whatever you do, don't say you're sorry. Because if you say you're sorry, that suggests that you are in some way at fault, that you're liable. You're opening yourself up to all of these lawsuits. This is going to cost you gazillions. Don't say you're sorry, which is perfectly understandable. But the other side of it is that actually the business, every business, is about people. And somebody has died. And you have to find a way to say, I'm sorry this person died. Otherwise, you're not human. So what you end up doing is agreeing a form of words, and you will very often have agreed this. You should have agreed this with your legal people in advance. But the form of words that you use is something like, we are all distraught. When John left his wife and family this morning to come into work, he expected he would go home to his wife and family again this evening. When we all saw him coming into work this morning, we expected we'd be saying cheerio to him when he left. We're offering every possible support that we can to his wife and family while we investigate this. But everybody loved John. He was highly regarded. He was highly respected. And we're simply distraught. Now, that says we're sorry, we're human. We know this should never have happened, without saying, we're sorry, please sue us. If they're going to sue you, they'll sue you anyway. But finding a way of saying you're sorry is equally important. And the seventh and final point is, don't allow exhaustion to take over. If you're a spokesperson, you need two spokespersons. You cannot handle a crisis. Think about how crisis happens nowadays. When I came into the business 30 years ago, if you had a crisis, you had probably 2 days to get on top of it. And then you had this news cycle where news happened on the hour, every hour. So it was predictable and you knew what was going to happen next. Now it's 24/7. News is going to sleep in one part of the world, it's waking up in the next part of the world. Social media never sleeps. So your crisis is real and it's constant and it's pressure. And if it is, you have to make sure that you have a second person you can hand over to, because one person cannot do 24/7 and be brilliant at it. This is a really good example of how to completely screw up an apology, which I'm sure was due to exhaustion. You're probably very familiar with it. It's Tony Hayward, and it's the Hayward, and it's the deep water oil disaster in the Gulf of Mexico. He's the chief executive, and we'll just run it for a second, of BP. Thanks, Molly.
Sunday, BP's CEO apologized.
We're sorry, actually. We're sorry for the massive disruption it's caused to their lives. And, there's no one who wants this thing over more than I do. I'd like my life back.
I mean, how stupid can you be? We are sorry for the massive disruption that we have caused to people's lives. Stop. He has apologized. BP screwed up. We have caused massive disruption. But he follows it by saying, we all want our lives back. I want my life back. I can completely, as a human being, I completely understand that he was run ragged, and of course he wants his life back. As a PR advisor, you think, really, with the lights not on, what's going on in that man's brain? People have died, people have lost their livelihoods, and he wants to get a bit of free time back again. We view things in an entirely different way. And that, I would think, was due to exhaustion. There's a super book, if you're interested in, called Spills and Spin. The journalist who wrote it would kill me for not remembering his name. I interviewed him on radio, fascinating guy, about how BP completely mishandled that crisis. It's a fascinating book if you get a chance to read it. Let me conclude by giving you 4 things, I suppose. The first is that you have to prepare. So for any crisis, you must do your homework in advance. You cannot be brilliant when the crisis happens. Nobody can. And if you haven't done your homework in advance, the chances are you are not going to come out of it well, and you may not actually survive it. You must, the second is that you must train your spokespersons. You must ensure that they are good media performers. And I mean that in the right way. I don't mean performers as in clever, glitzy people. I mean people who understand the media, who understand the use of language, who know how to communicate a message clearly, succinctly, without causing more confusion. The third is that you must identify your resources, the people that you can call on at a minute's notice. So your PR people, your legal people, and your deep throat if you can. Those three on the end of a phone saying, this is what's happened. Tell me now, what do I do with it? Or get involved right this minute. And the fourth, I suppose, is kind of obvious. It's expect a roller coaster ride. It will break fast. It will break your heart. You will literally have people coming at you from absolutely every angle. And you need to know when to close it down. So you need to say, we've actually done everything we've done. We've ridden out the storm as much as is humanly possible. Now we're just not answering any more questions. As far as we're concerned, this is now finished. But you can't do that too early, or you're seen not to be interacting with media. And if you do it too late, you've actually kept the crisis on the agenda when it should have gone off at a month beforehand. I hope that was of some help. Thank you for your attention.
Just if anybody else is interested in finding out more, we've created a crisis communication course. Our members on annual subscription will already have got early access to this. For everybody else, it's on our website, and it'll cover a lot around preparation, preparing your plan, preparing your crisis team, identifying stakeholders, a lot of useful information on talking to the media, avoiding difficult questions and sticking to your message. The crisis news release is also useful. So that's going to have a lot of phrasing and language that you can stockpile. So in answer to that earlier question about the embargoed press release, you can have templates with information you can put your hand to straight away that will make your life easier. But also, as I said, a stockpile of useful phrases that you can say what you need to say in the early stages without committing to any kind of liability. There's a lot of good advice there. I'm going to be sending everybody a code with that you can apply to that course on our website, and it will give you a discount. We also do corporate training. I see we have some of our alumni here from our corporate training. We do crisis communication, media interview skills. So if you or your organization would be interested in having a training session tailored for you, you can contact me at Colette at the Irish Academy of Public Relations, or even at puretrainingonline.com. Sorry, I forget where I work. And
it's been a long day.
Yeah, I work everywhere. 6 job, Colette. So our next webinar, we'll send you notifications. That's the 15th of July, and we'll be talking about social media. So I want to thank Ellen again for presenting today. Follow up by all means if you have any other questions. We'd love to hear from you. I know that some of you will be seeing soon because we see you regularly. And thanks again for coming. Okay, have a nice afternoon, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.